Well, it's good to be back. It's good to be back in the studio making some videos. So in this video, due to popular demand, we're going to go over how to set up an external synth into the MPC, all the routing with both the cables and inside the MPC, how to sample the external synth into a new program inside the MPC, and also how to do live preset switching on external synths for live performance using the MPC. Also, another really powerful thing you can do with an external synth connected to the MPC is using the auto sampler. Now there's a link down below to a full video talking about the auto sampler, so make sure to check out that after you check out this video. So let's just jump right in and get connected. So to start off with routing, we're going to first take a MIDI cable and go from the MIDI out on the back of the MPC into the MIDI in on the external synth, and then return the signal from the MIDI out back into the MIDI in on the MPC. This will allow us first to trigger the external synth from the pads on the MPC, and second, use whatever sort of input the external synth has to trigger notes on the external synth keyboard, and those will be recorded into the MPC. Now, if your external synth does have MIDI over USB, a single USB connection will actually carry both the in and outgoing MIDI, so one cable can take care of both directions. And finally, the last thing we need to do is connect the audio out from the external synth into the input on your MPC. All right, it's Stu from the future editing the video, and I think this would be a good time just to mention gain staging. If you're not familiar with gain staging, just search YouTube for gain staging, a ton of videos. Essentially what it is turning the volume up on your source, such as the external synth, as much as possible without distortion. So when you're bringing it into your receiving source like the MPC, you don't have to use the gain on the preamps inside of the MPC. Typically, that's a really good way to reduce any sort of added noise from the preamps inside of the receiving device. So just have a Google for gain staging and familiarize yourself. And back to the video. Now that we're physically connected between the external synth and the MPC, let's take a look at setting up the MIDI routing and the audio routing between the two units. So on the MPC, we're going to first turn the track into a MIDI track using this center lower icon here that looks like a MIDI plug. And then we're going to have to select what MIDI port we are using for communication. So right here where it says MIDI port, we're going to double click on that, or you can use the click encoder. If you have an external synth that does have MIDI over USB, you'll see it register right here, Tarise AS1 MIDI 1. But for this example, we're going to be actually using the MIDI cable, so we'd select MPC. Now above the MIDI port, we do have program channel, bank MSB, and bank LSB. This actually allows us to change the preset on the external synth from the MPC. This comes in really handy for live performance because this is dedicated to the sequence, so when you switch sequences, you can actually trigger program changes and preset changes on your external synth from the MPC. So if we touch program change right here and just start turning this, we're going to notice that we already have programs changing over here. Now, one thing to note, since this starts at 0 and this starts at 1, there's always a single digit offset. So program 0 over here is actually 1 over here. Program 1 here is actually 2 here. And that also goes for the banks. So if we go into our bank, we're on bank 1. And if we change this to 1, now we're on user bank 2, user bank 3, so on and so forth. So just one note is that there is always a single digit offset when you're using this to change the program between the two units. Now that they're talking to each other, when we play MIDI on the external synth here, we're seeing that it's receiving input data over here, but we're not getting any audio. So the easiest way to do this is to go into the menu, go to the sampler, and since this is routed from the output into the sampler input, we're just going to go and enable the monitoring, and we should be hearing some audio now. So now we have audio coming from the external synth into the MPC. So with the routing fully enabled now, we're actually able to use the MPC effects on the incoming signal. Here's an example. We have a dry 303 sound, but we can come in and we can start putting, let's say, a reverb. I typically prefer not to put those effects on there because I like to do that after I record this in. And now with everything correctly connected to each other, we're able to track MIDI from the MPC into the external synth and vice versa, the external synth recording into the MPC. So if we go into the grid and let's just lay down kind of a basic 16th note repeating bass line. But I want to use this and then more sounds out of the external synth. And this is where we'd have to start recording the external synth into the MPC and printing our ideas so we can use more sounds from our single external synth. So in order to capture the idea from the external synth, we're going to go into our menu and back into our sampler and capture the sample. So you'll notice when we hit ARM, it says waiting for signal. Now it is going to automatically start recording as soon as it hits the threshold that is determined by this red slider here. So I'm going to set it right to about -9 because I know my signal is going to be louder than that. I'm going to hit play from the start and it's going to start recording that external synth. And I'm going to call this bass 16th notes, and I'm going to keep. Now we're going to go back into our main. We're still on our MIDI track, so we're going to go over to an open track and go to our program 01, go to browse, and we're going to go ahead and assign our bass 16 to this pad. But right now it defaults to one shot, but I want it just so it only plays when I hold down the note. So we're going to go down to Program Edit. Another way to get there if you don't have a dedicated Program Edit button is just to hold Menu and then hit the corresponding pad where you see Program Edit. And we're going to take the sample playback from one shot into note on. That means it only plays when I'm holding down the button. This is extremely handy for when you're dealing with loops, so when you're actually sequencing notes, you can just make it cut off whenever you don't want it to continue to play. So now let's just go back into main and let's just place this note in here. Let's take a look at our grid. Let's just double check and make sure that it went all the way to the end, which it's close enough. But since this is now a sample inside of the MPC, I want to add, let's say, a filter cutoff to it and maybe a little bit of a pump so it gets out of the way of the kick. So we're just going to come up here to our eyeball. By default, it starts at the program level, but we're going to go to the pad level. And I want to add, let's say, a filter to this sound. So let's go to filter right here and then let's bring up the drive a little bit. I like that hard clip with a drive. And I want to add a little bit of a pump so it gets out of the way of that kick drum. So we're going to come back up to Dynamics, go to Pumper, take the rate down to about 60, leave it on quarter notes. Turn the attack down all the way to immediate so it instantly gets out of the way of that kick, and now they should be sharing the same space. And when I hit stop, the loop just stops because we are just using it in a note on setting. So now this gives me room to go back into my first track, which is muted. I'm going to go into the grid. I'm going to clean out all of these notes that are in there just by selecting everything, shift, shift and cut, shift and cut. And now let's unmute that channel and maybe find another sound that's in here that we want to use. We could either change the program using our external synth, or we could also use a program change right here. Now let's take a look at using the external synths in more of a live scenario. This is going to be extremely basic, but it's just to understand the concept. So we have this very basic drum pattern. And that's going to include a bass line from here, but then we want to copy that onto another sequence. So we'll say sequence 2. And in this sequence, I want to remove the kicks from the sequence. So we're just going to go Shift, Cut. And we're just going to put some sort of extended pad or held note from the external synth. So back in sequence number 1, track number 1, we have our first sound right here. And it shows program 19 and program 20, because remember there is a single note offset between the two. And we're just going to record in a generic 16th note bass line using note repeat. And now let's say in the second sequence, we wanted this to be our breakdown. So what we're going to do is use our program change right here to find another sound. So we found this extended pad, and we're going to record this in on sequence number 2, sort of as a breakdown. Now, when we switch back to the first sequence, it's going to use program change here to trigger the other sound we had set within the first sequence and go back to that grooving bass line. All right, there it is. I hope that helped you understand how to connect your external synth to the MPC, using it both in a production situation and in a live situation. Now, there's another video linked down below to talk about the auto sampler feature inside the MPC, which is an amazing feature. And a little spoiler alert, you can actually use it not only with external synths, but if you're using controller mode on your MPC, you can use it with VSTs as well, and take any sound you have out of your computer onto the MPC in standalone and bring it with you on the go. So thank you so much for watching this video. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please click down below. I really appreciate everybody's support. And on that note, thanks for your time. Thanks for your attention. Now go make something cool.